Now we're on Daf Chaf Aleph Amid Beis. And just to reiterate, what we learned until now is that according to Rabbi Yehuda, they would place the child, in Rava's opinion, bidafka, only on the shore itself, and the child will be afraid that he's going to fall off the back of the ox, and he won't stick his head out or his arm out. He'll be fixed to the back of the shore. Tanya Kavase de Rav. We bring a brisa to support Rava that Rabbi Yehuda does not want to deal with blossoms. Leave out the doors. Rabbi Yehuda Omer lo hayu meviim blossoms kolika. Don't bring a deles. Mipnei shedaito sholtino gasa olav. And if they'll bring a deles and they'll put the child on top of the deles, the child feels like he's secure, he's having a blast, he's having fun, he's moving from side to side. He's not going to be afraid to stick his head out. V'shema yotzi rosho o echad mevarov v'tamei b'kever tahom. Ella, but rather leave out the doors. Meviim shvarim hamitzrim. Apparently, the largest oxen came from Egypt. And kreoseim rechavos, so that the back, which is protecting the belly of the ox, they had very large bellies. I always knew that the Egyptians were known for their horses. I didn't know they were famous for their oxen as well. And atinokos yoshvin al gabeim, and they would sit on top of the oxen, and they are too afraid to move their head or any limbs of their body outside of the ox's back because they might fall, and therefore we don't have to worry about too much stuff. As we discussed earlier, they got to this spring, which is called the Mei Shiloach, which is outside Yerushalayim, and there they would mamali the mine. They took the cups of water, cups of stone, they dipped it into the Mei Shiloach, filled it up with water. And then they restructured themselves on the back of the shul. Now the Gemara goes back to the question that we asked on Rav Dimi. Rav Dimi, if you remember, said that Rabbi Yehuda concedes that if you have an oil that has a halal, it shelters a cavity that's kimole egrov, then even if it was created by nature itself, it serves and is valid as an oil. Okay, now we go back to our Mishnah. First Mishnah, the second paragraph of Succah, deals with the case of someone who is sleeping inside a sukkah, but underneath a bed. And mita yeshba kama egrofin. When you think about it, they had a bed with legs, very similar to our beds. It's just that I think in our contemporary beds, the bed gets pretty close down to the ground, but not in the case of the beds of yesteryear during the time of the Talmud. There was a lot of open space on the other side of the bed, and therefore the wood plank, of the bed where they put the mattress on, was certainly an oil which creates a halal of mole agrofim, many agrofim, kama agrofim. So there's a space between the ground and the bottom of the other side of the bed that takes up many agrofim, and therefore it should be considered an oil. Utnan, and yet in our Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, we used to sleep inside the sukkah underneath the bed. What are you talking about? How can Rabbi Yehuda validate sleeping in a sukkah underneath a bed? You're in an oil. You're not in the sukkah, you're in an oil. And this oil has a second degree oil, meaning it's on the highest level of an oil because the bed is hovering over and sheltering an area that has many agrofim. So therefore we have a hefsek, a chatzitza, if you will, between him sleeping underneath the bed and a schach on top of the sukkah. And that chatzitza is the oil, which is the underside of the bed. So the Gemara, it's a shiny mita. Hoil ulegabahi asuya. You know what? A mita cannot be an oil because an oil needs kavana according to Rabbi Yehuda. You have to create it as an oil in order to shelter the area below the oil. He's not interested in protecting the area underneath the bed. He's interested in sleeping on top of the bed. So the Gemara says, "Shvarim nami legavana asuya." In the case of a shar, the shar serving as an oil is like a bed. We are talking about riding the shar. And as far as the shar protecting its belly is concerned, that's not what we're dealing with. We're analyzing the shar as a means of transportation to get the child over to the Meshilach, etc. So therefore, why would Rabbi Yehuda claim that the tinokas can sit on top of the back of an ox, and that's considered an oil to protect them from any kever tahom? Why would this back of an ox be a chatzitza to protect tumah any better than a bed that has all that empty space under it? What we're saying, well, it's legaba asuya. He also Rav Amar Rabbi Lazar shani shvarim hol umeginim al haroim bechama b'pnei achama ubekeshamim b'pnei ageshamim. Wow, this is already a curveball. We've been talking about riding on the back of an ox. Did you ever hear of anyone who hid himself underneath the ox? Again, ox is a pretty big animal. So the shepherds, when it was raining and pouring in the winter, or when the sun was beating down on them in the hot summertime, like here in Yavniel, it's very hot out here. So what they would do is they would hide under the belly of the ox. Whole new perspective on ox. We're going to have to write a Talmudic encyclopedia called Ox. A new insight into ox. If you come from Toronto, then you'll know Rabbi Ox. It's a famous. So the Gemara says that the shar is considered an ohel. Why? Because it protects the roim, the shepherds, who are finding protection underneath the ox. The Gemara says, "Ihachi mita hol magina min olim sandal chetachtel." Guess what? I put things underneath my bed. I put my shoes underneath my bed, my sandals underneath my bed, and therefore the bed is an oil protecting my shoes. And based on this question, the Gemara now goes back to the drawing board to find a different distinction between the ox and the bed, the ox of Olos and the bed of Sukkah. Elomar Rava, Shani Shvarim, Hoel Vasuyim, Lahagen, Al Bnei Me'ayim Shalom. Shenemar, now the Gemara quotes a pasuk. The pasuk is in Tehillim, I believe. Just see if I'm right. No, I'm sorry. It's a pasuk in Iyov. Or ubasar talbisheni, uvatsamos v'gidin tisochacheni. Now let's emphasize the word tisochacheni. Tisochacheni is a conjugated verb. The shorish, the root of it, and the noun is schach. And now we're deriving from the pasuk that the outer structure of the shar, of the animal, including the rib cage and the back of the animal, around the rib cage, all this is considered schach. Schach is something that's used to protect something below it. And the Torah in Iyov is teaching us that these atzomos, these bones, the rib cage, are protecting the gidim and the basa. Notice there's a lot of meat and sinews and so forth inside the cavity, the intestines of the shor, so that we can forget about whether or not the mita could on certain occasions be used to protect the shoes that are underneath the mita, and whether the roim sometimes crawl underneath the shor, on a hot summer day, when the sun is at its zenith. Forget about all that. Says Rava, we're going to derive Rabbi Yehuda's conclusion from a pasuk in Eov, which actually defines the outer structure, the body of the ox as schach, as protecting the intestines, the bnei me'ayim, the gidim, and the basar of the animal. Now the Gemara offers another answer to explain and justify Rav Dimi. Ibais Ema, the truth is, at this point, I'm going to concede to you that according to Rabbi Yehuda, the mita itself is an oil, even according to Rabbi Yehuda. And nevertheless, even though it's an oil, Rabbi Yehuda is going to allow you to sleep under the mita inside a sukkah, and it's not an oil hamafsik. In other words, even though I recognize that the mita is an oil, but nevertheless, as far as sukkah is concerned, we have a new din. It's not a mafsik. It doesn't qualify as a chatzitza, separating the person who's sleeping under the mita from the schach on top of the sukkah. Why is that so? Because the mita is movable. What does that mean, movable? You put your bed here, then you move it here. It's in a very temporary kind of situation. So it is an oil, but it's a temporary oil. And that's called an oil arod. What about the schach and the sukkah? And here we have a chiddush. It's an oil keva. What do you mean keva? I've got the sukkah for 7 days. That's it. Why is that called an oil keva? That's because of Rabbi Yehuda's unique shita. Rabbi Yehuda says that you can only fulfill the mitzvah of sukkah if the sukkah is roy as an oil keva. So, for example, we're going to need, let's say, 3 walls plus a small 4th wall. And it could be Lamala me Esrim Amma, the first mission of Masechet Sukkah. That Rabbi Yehuda is the dissenting opinion, and he validates a sukkah that's 20 amas high because it's a diras keva. Again, I'm going to sit in it only on a temporary basis for 7 days, but the sukkah itself is an oil keva. And now the Gemara invokes a new principle. Havile mita diras aroi. The bed itself, which is movable, is only a temporary dira. The sukkah, but the status of the sukkah is that it's an oil keva. V'lo osi oil aroi umevatel oil keva. The fact that he's sleeping under the bed in an oil aroi does not undermine the fact that he's sleeping in an oil keva in the sukkah itself. So yes, I admit to you that Rabbi Yehuda would qualify the bed as an oil. And it protects anything in that great halal, which is called Gemolei Agrofim. Even though it wasn't created for the purpose of being an oil on top, but rather on the bottom. I'm sorry, it wasn't created for the bottom, but rather on top. But nevertheless, it's an oil. But it's an oil aroi. And an oil aroi is not a mafsik if the oil aroi finds itself in an oil keva. It's really interesting. If you next time, you look around the room, if you're in a bedroom, and you'll see beds, but the beds are in a house. So where are you if you're underneath the bed? Are you underneath the bed or you're in the house? So the Gemara asks, Rabbi Shimon Rabbi Shimon is the one, if you recall, who requires 3 defanos full-fledged defanos plus a fourth tefa. Otherwise, it's not a kosher sukkah. He too is on board and he requires a diras keva for sukkah. And yet, in our Mishnah, Reb Shimon was in agreement with the Tanakhama, dissenting Rabbi Yehuda, and if you sleep under a sukkah, you're not yotz under the bed, you're not yotz in the mitzvah of sukkah. You see that Rabbi Shimon holds that even though you're in an oel aroy, in the case of a mito, you're underneath an oel aroy, but nevertheless, it's mavatel oel keva, it's a chatzitza, and you're not yotz in the mitzvah of sukkah. That's Rabbi Shimon. And Gemara says, Mar Savar, according to Reb Shimon, Asi ol aroy mavatel ol keva. Despite the fact that you're inside a temporary oel, that's where you are. It still is an oel. And you're not in the old keva. You're underneath the bed. You're not in the house. And Rabbi Yehuda Mar Savar, Asi ol aroy, lo asi ol aroy mavatel ol keva. We're back at our Mishnah, and we're talking about the famous Tevi. You remember from Fiddler, this is Tevi, who's the outstanding scholar, and he is an Eved to Rabbi Gamliel. And Rav Shimon, Rabbi Gamliel testified that he saw that Tevi, his Eved, who was quite a Talmud Chacham, would sleep underneath the bed. We derive two conclusions. Number one, and that's why he slept under a bed. I need Tevi to tell me that an Eved is potter from Sukkah. Eved in mitzvahs has the same status as an Isha. He's exempt from time-bound mitzvahs. A woman is exempt from sukkah, and an Eved is exempt from sukkah. I need Tevi, the great scholar, the Eved, to teach me that an Eved is potter from sukkah. So the Ritva has an amazing chiddush to explain the Havamim before Tevi. What were they thinking before Tevi? A woman is obligated to sukkah. You know why? Because she's married to her husband. A husband has to sit in the sukkah. She also has to sit in the sukkah. Because the Tosfos says, Teishmu ke'ein taduru. Make your sukkah your house. I know many people, again, I shouldn't say this publicly, the men go out to sleep in the sukkah, the women remain at home. I have a friend from Toronto, Canada. She told me when I touched ground in Toronto that she's 8 years in Toronto. She has not yet slept in the sukkah. It's too cold. Truth is, her husband shouldn't have slept in the sukkah if it's so cold. She's very sensitive to the cold. But that's called Teshu Kain Taduru. So a woman is obligated in sukkah because of Teshu Kain Taduru, it says the mitzvah, and therefore the Havamina wasn't an Eved. Likewise, having the same status as an Isha mitzvahs, would be obligated in sukkah. Kamashwan Tevi broke new ground, and he said Teshu Kain Taduru. That's a very nice moral obligation within the framework of marriage, and a woman would be commended if she went to sleep in the sukkah with her husband, but that's not a personal chovas gavra, an obligation of the mitzvah. What else do we derive from this story? That's why Tevi allowed himself to sleep underneath the bed, because if you sleep underneath the bed, you're not yotze the mitzvah of sukkah. He wanted to demonstrate that as an Eved, he's potter from sukkah, therefore he doesn't have to be mach. The lema midvara of Shel Rabbi Gamliel. Why did you use the term, if we go back to the statement of the Bryce, it says misichaso Shel Rabbi Gamliel. That's a very strange word, misichaso, from his schmoozing, as we would say. He should have said miyam raso, or midvarav Shel Rabbi Gamliel, milsa agav urcha kamash. He tells me by the by that the sichas chulin, even a sicha even a shmooze of a Talmud Chacham. He's schmoozing to you. He's telling to you about, the beautiful view that he saw of Emek Yisrael on the way up north. Listen carefully. You can learn tremendous lessons in Torah, in Yerushalayim and Avodas Hashem from the Sicha of a Talmud Chacham, the Sichas Chulin of a Talmud Chacham. Ki Hodi Amar Rabbi Acha Bar Ada Amri Le others say Amar Rav Acha Bar Ada Amar Rav Hamnun Amar Rav Minayin Shafilu Sichas Talmidei Chachamim Tzricha Limud. We should learn from the very, in a sense, mundane discussions of a Talmud Chacham, that we should study what he says and derive conclusions. Shenemer Pasuk in Tehillim, the Oleu Lo Yibo. Oleu means even the olive, even the leaves that fall off, Lo Yibo. It's that don't discount them; they're important. Don't let them go evil. Learn even something from the olive. The olive here are metaphors for Sichas Chulin. Here I wanted to add something, the English translation. Just give me a minute to find it. He writes the following. If you have this is footnote 22. He writes that there are lessons that are included even in the casual conversation of a Torah scholar. And the verse states that even a scholar's lighthearted comments, which are like the leaves of a tree, the leaves are the lightest part of the tree, do not wither, lo yivo, they do not wither, but rather contain enduring lessons. And this leads us to the Mishnah on the bottom of Chaf Aleph Amid Beis. Asomech sukaso bekare hamita. So this is the Mishnah of Dovra Maimon. Are you familiar with that phrase? If you know even beans about all the contemporary issues in sukkahs, if you have a beautiful modern sukkah today, no doubt you'll have a shaila called the Dovra Maimon. Because the question is, what's holding up the schach? Now, if you have defanos and you put the schach directly on the defanos, maybe you put slats of wood that they themselves could serve as schach, then that's fine. But if you've got metal poles that are holding up the schach, then you have our Mishnah to deal with. Because hasomech sukaso bekare amita, which means that a bed has posts. These are thick wooden slats of wood that go up on four sides. And he places his schach straight across these boards. Sheira, according to Tanakama, that's fine. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, im eno yechol lava b'fnei atzma. That means if you would move the bed from one place to the other, all the schach is going to fall down. It's very loosely hanging. Psula. And the Gemara is going to explain why. My time of Rabbi Yehuda. Why does Rabbi Yehuda invalidate, disqualify his sukkah? She'ena yechol lama b'fnei atzma. Cannot stand on its own. Liba Rabbi Zera for Rabbi Abba Bar Mam. Chad Omer b'nei she'en la keva. Which means that the sukkah and the schach could only be moved together with the mita. And that makes it into a diras arod, and it's not a diras kevin. As we said, Rabbi Yehuda l'shitasa requires a diras kevin. The Chadam, or another opinion, we don't know who it is, whether it's Rabbi Zera or Rabbi Abba, mipnei shema mida b'davar hamakabel tumah. In order to guarantee that the schach will sit securely on the top of the bedposts, he uses some sort of, let's call it a metal pole on the four ends, and the schach will sit on that to give it security, and that's called maimon. You see the word mamida, maimon. Maimon means it holds up the schach, and it's metal. It's a davar hamakabel tumah. And in the Hebrew translation, he writes, Kishem sheschach b'makabel tumah pasul, if you use a davar makabel tuma schach, it's possible. It's described. Gam im someches schach, even that which is carrying the schach, it's holding on to the schach. Im sichech al gabi davar makabel tuma possible. So the maimid of a sukkah is like part of the schach almost. It keeps up the sukkah, the schach, and it has the same requirements as the schach. It's got to be a davar she'eino makabel tuma. If it's makabel tuma, davar she'makabel tuma is possible not only for schach but even as a maimid. That's the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. I don't know that we paskin like Rabbi Yehuda, but it's a very serious opinion that has to be contended. The kevan she'abdi mamidim shal schach ikro shal schachem. It's like he used schach that's a davar makabel tuma. Oh, he doesn't even introduce metal. He is now going with the sheet of Rashi here that we're talking about the bedposts. And the bedposts are part of the bed. And the bed is a kli, and a kli is makabel tuma. Hence, the bedposts are the davar ha'maimid for the schach, and they are pasul the schach, and therefore they pasul the sukkah. My beit nine. Is there any practical difference between these two interpretations of Rabbi Yehuda? Ego, shenat shipudim shel barzel. Here's clearly a case where he uses these vertical poles that are made of metal, and they are holding up his schach. That Rabbi Yehuda passes the bedpost because the bed is movable. Is here, he's got real serious metal poles. That's keva. That's really secure. If the law that requires that the schach is not makabel tuma applies and extends even to the maimid of the schach, and that also has to be a davar she'eino makabel tuma, is here harei ma'amida b'davar makabel tuma. The shpudim on metal, and therefore they're makabel tuma. That would pass the sukkah. Amar Abaye lo shanu. We didn't learn Rabbi Yehuda's psul ella samach. If the schach is directly on the karei amita, on the posts, the legs of the bed. Avol sichech al gav hamita. In other words, he puts up what's called yisedos, and Rashi quotes yisedos. He puts up like wooden pegs on top of the posts, and he puts the schach on top of these yisedos, which are made of wood, kshera. And that's true according to both explanations for Rabbi Yehuda, my timer. According to Rabbi Yehuda, lefi shein lehem keva yesh lehem keva. By placing these yisedos on top of the karei amita, on top of the posts, he makes it into keva. The schach is not moving around. It's really set permanently on these sedos. Ulamanti Omar, mipnei shemamida b'davar makabel tuma, harei ein ma'amida b'davar shemakabel tuma. In this case, the sedos, which are made of wood, and they are what's called pshutei kliates. And a pshutei kliates means wood without a receptacle. It's not makabel tuma. It's not susceptible to tuma, and it's not a part and parcel of the mita, so it doesn't have a chain kli. It's a separate added addendum. He made like a framework on which he could put his schach. Therefore, the sukkah is a sukkah kshet. And this leads us to the Mishnah on Daf Chav Beis, which in Mirza Hashem, same time, same place, same station, we'll meet tomorrow. Thank you so much, and have a great day.
Rav Berzon.
I'm listening.
Yehuda Blumenthal.
How are you?
I sent you an email the other day about the biblical etymology.
Oh, okay. So I apologize. I've been a little bit out of it the last couple of days, and I haven't checked my email. I'll take a look at it and get back to you. Is that all right?
Yes, please. Thank you very much.
Okay, great.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes, please.
Discussion about the ox. In a regular ox, why do you have to talk about the intestines and why can't you just say the ox is a structure and it's like a tent? Just like you have it don't you use animals in Eruvin when you make an Eruv? You can put in an ox and put a. So why can't the ox just become a tent all just by itself, like the people underneath it? The structure of the ox.
Well, right now, again, I'm not familiar offhand with the Sugyat Erevin, but right now, we're assuming that an OL has to have, excuse me, has to shelter a cavity. We need some sort of empty space that has to be protected. That's called Succah, and then it becomes an OL. So the Gemara is wondering, why is the back of an ox protecting an empty space or a cavity? And the answer is because the Pasuk indicates that in a biological sense, it's the back and the rib cage that is going to protect the. So if you like, I can.
But you have a cavity.
I can try to look in Erevin. Again, my time here is a little bit limited, but if you want to send me a Maramoko, I could take a look in Erevin and see what's going on over there. When you
I
talk
just mentioned Eruvin because it seems like the animal itself has a structure to it that you can be like the space between the four legs.
Oh,
that's not considered halal.
Oh, so that's what the Gemara wanted to say, that the Roim, the shepherds, if you recall, they go underneath into that space and they get protection. And that makes the shar into an oath. But the Gemara is not sure about that because how often do the Roim actually avail themselves of that? And that's where the Gemara wants to know if Rabbi Yehuda would validate that as an oath. It
seems to me that's a simpler way of looking at an ox or any four-legged animal, because it's it's like a structure, like a table.
Again, a table has to protect something underneath it. Do you function under a table? That's a little bit odd. Who goes under a table? A child maybe goes under a table. In the case of an ox, maybe a roa goes under the ox. All right, I'm going to go and keep in touch. Hopefully we'll see you tomorrow. Baruch Hashem, I think as an experiment, it worked very well. We can only hope it'll work that way tomorrow. Bye-bye.